My husband passed away 14 months ago. At least that's what I was told. I was the one who identified his body. I was the one who planned the funeral, picked out the casket, mahogany because he always said he liked the color of old wood. And I was the one who stood in the rain at Riverside Memorial Cemetery in Tucson while the pastor read from John 14. I was 63 years old, and I had just buried the man I had shared 38 years of my life with. I went home to a house that still smelled like his aftershave, and I cried until there was nothing left inside me. I thought that was the worst day of my life. I was wrong. The worst day came on a Tuesday in March, 14 months later, when I walked into the Costco off East Broadway and saw my dead husband standing in the frozen food aisle. His name is Howard, mine is Iris, and this is what happened. For the first few months after Howard died, I didn't do much of anything. That's the honest truth. My daughter drove down from Phoenix every other weekend to check on me. She'd bring groceries, sit with me on the back porch, and try to get me to talk. I loved her for it. I also knew she had a husband and 2 kids at home, and I felt terrible watching her divide herself in half for my sake. By month 4, I started telling her I was fine. By month 6, I was almost starting to believe it. Howard and I had met when I was 25. He was an engineer, civil, not the exciting kind he always joked. We raised our daughter in a house 3 miles from where we got married. We took the same vacation every summer for 20 years, a little cabin rental outside Sedona, because we both loved the red rocks and neither of us was very good at changing plans we liked. He was a quiet man, steady, the kind of man who fixed things without being asked and remembered how you took your coffee without ever writing it down. When he died, a heart attack, sudden, no warning, I didn't know how to be a person anymore. Everything I did assumed he was somewhere nearby. I'd cook too much food. I'd turn down the TV volume when I heard his key in the but of course there was no key. There was no sound. There was just the house and me and the particular silence of a life that had been built for two. By the time 14 months had passed, I was doing better. Not good, better. I had started going to a grief support group on Thursday evenings at our church. I had taken up watercolor painting, badly but with genuine enthusiasm. I was eating regular meals. I was sleeping through the night more often than not. My daughter called every Sunday and I had real things to tell her. That felt like progress. The Tuesday I walked into Costco, I had a short list: paper towels, sparkling water, the big bag of mixed nuts my grandson liked. Nothing remarkable. It was the kind of errand I had done 100 times, the kind of ordinary afternoon that grief eventually allows you back into. I had just put the sparkling water in my cart when I looked up. He was maybe 40 feet away. He had his back to me, standing in front of the frozen entrees, and he was wearing a grey jacket I had never seen before. But the way he stood, the particular set of his shoulders, the way he tilted his head slightly to the left when he was reading something, I felt the air leave my lungs. I told myself, it is not him. People look like other people. You are a woman who buried her husband 14 months ago, and your brain is doing something your brain sometimes does. He turned his head slightly to the side. My cart handle was in my hands, and suddenly I couldn't feel my hands. It was Howard's jaw, Howard's ear, Howard's hairline, gone silver at the temples the way it had been going for the last decade. Something in my chest dropped 6 inches. The cart rolled forward and I didn't stop it. It hit the refrigerator case with a soft thud, and the woman next to me looked over and said, "Oh, you okay, Hon?" And I said something, I don't know what, because I was already moving. I walked toward him the way you walk in a dream, like the floor is slightly wrong. I got close enough to see his hands, his left hand, specifically, and there was a ring on it, a different ring. Not the plain gold band I had put on his finger at St. Augustine's Church in 1987, a silver one, thicker. He hadn't hurt me. He was reading the back of a frozen lasagna box. I stopped 6 feet behind him and said his name. He went completely still. He turned around slowly, and when he saw my face, every bit of color left his. It was Howard. My dead husband was standing in the Costco on East Broadway in Tucson, Arizona, reading a frozen lasagna box wearing a ring I had never seen, and he was looking at me like I was the ghost. I said, very quietly, "Howard." He didn't answer. "Howard," I said again, "who is buried in your grave?" He tried to speak. He made a sound, something between my name and an excuse, and I felt my legs go strange. I put my hand on the refrigerator case to steady myself. The cold seeped through my palm. I focused on that. The cold, the solid surface. I needed something real because nothing else in the world felt real. "We should go somewhere," he said. His voice was the same. 14 months, and his voice was exactly the same, and I had spent 14 months learning how to live without that voice. And now here it was in the frozen food aisle, asking me to go somewhere. "We will not go somewhere," I said. I was surprised by how steady I sounded. "You will stand right here, and you will tell me who is in that grave." He looked around. There were other shoppers. He was uncomfortable. That registered in some deep, cold part of me. He was uncomfortable. He was embarrassed. He was embarrassed. He was worried about what the strangers in the Costco would think. His name wasn't even Howard anymore, it turned out. He had been going by his middle name, David. David, like a new person, a new ring, a new name, and apparently a new life. He told me what he told me in pieces, standing there between the frozen lasagna and the breakfast burritos, because I refused to move and he had no choice. 6 months before his death, he had gotten into serious financial trouble. Debt, more than I knew about, more than he'd ever let me see. A failed investment, a second mortgage on a rental property he'd told me he sold years ago, private loans from people who were not patient men. He had been hiding it for years. He said he didn't know how to tell me. He said he panicked. He said things had gotten so bad that he couldn't see a way out that didn't destroy everything. So he chose the way out that destroyed everything anyway, just more deliberately. He had found a man, a transient, someone with no local family, no one looking for him, who had died of a heart attack in a motel outside of Bisbee. He had connections through his work, people who owed him favors, documents were altered, a body was identified as his. I was brought in to identify it, and I had identified it because I was a woman in shock who had just been told her husband was dead, and because the body was the right height and the right age and the face was. I stopped wanting to remember what the face looked like. He had moved to New Mexico, Albuquerque, about 6 hours away. He'd built a smaller, quieter life. He worked as a contractor under a different name. He had met a woman. He had met a woman. He had, it appeared, begun to be happy. And for 14 months, while I was learning to sleep alone and going to grief group on Thursday nights and painting terrible watercolors and trying to remember how to be a person, he was 6 hours away being happy. I stood in that aisle for what felt like a long time. I didn't cry. I noted that. I had cried so much in 14 months that maybe I had reached some limit, or maybe what I felt standing there wasn't sadness anymore. It was something else, something colder and more clarifying. "Does our daughter know?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. That was all the answer I needed. "My daughter is 34 years old. She has her father's jawline and my stubbornness, which I've always considered a good combination. She drove down from Phoenix every other weekend for 6 months after the funeral. She sat with me on the porch. She told me she missed him. She cried in my kitchen when she thought I wasn't looking. She organized the paperwork for the life insurance. She helped me write the thank you notes for the sympathy cards. And she knew. I don't know exactly when she found out, or how much she knew. And for a long time, for the weeks that came after the Costco, I couldn't let myself ask, because asking meant hearing the answer. But eventually, I did ask, and eventually, she told me. She had found out 8 months after the funeral. Howard, her father, had contacted her. He had explained. He had told her he was alive, that it was complicated, that he needed her to keep it from me, for now, that telling me would destroy me. He had framed it as protection, as kindness. He was good at framing things. She had agonized over it, she told me. She said she almost told me a dozen times. She said she had convinced herself that he was right, that I was fragile, that I was just getting better, that telling me would undo everything. She said she was sorry. She said it more times than I could count. I listened to all of it. Then I said, I need you to leave my house. She left. She cried on the porch first, and I heard her, and it was one of the hardest things I have ever done, standing on the other side of that door while my daughter cried. But I needed her to go. I needed to sit with what I now knew, in a space that was only mine. Here is what I knew. My husband had staged his death, assumed a new identity, and built a new life. He had involved my daughter in his lie. He had let me grieve. He had watched from some distance through some channel while I tried to put myself back together, and he had let that continue, and he had told himself it was the kindest option. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Outside, the desert light was doing what it does in late afternoon, turning everything gold and amber and strange. I had always loved that light. Howard and I used to sit on the back porch and watch it. I made a decision at that table. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt very clear and very quiet. I called the Pima County Sheriff's Office. What followed was not fast. These things are never fast. There were phone calls, and then there were visits, and then there were people I had never heard of from agencies I had only seen on television, and there were questions, so many questions, and some of them were about me, whether I had known, whether I had been involved. That part was unpleasant. I understood it, but it was unpleasant. Howard, or David as he'd been calling himself, was located in Albuquerque within 2 weeks. The charges took longer to explain than I have room for here, but they included fraud, identity theft, filing a false death certificate, and several financial crimes related to the insurance policies I had filed claims on after his supposed death, the life insurance, the retirement accounts, money I had received and spent in good faith that was now entangled in something I hadn't known existed. I hired an attorney. She was 61 years old and had a framed print in her office that said, nevertheless, she persisted, which under other circumstances I might have found cliché, but which I found, in that moment, exactly right. My daughter called many times during those weeks. I didn't answer at first. Then, after about 3 weeks, I answered. I didn't know what I was going to say, but she started talking before I could, and she didn't make excuses this time. She didn't explain or justify. She just said, Mom, I am so sorry. I know that doesn't fix it. I know that might not be enough. But I am sorry, and I love you, and I will wait as long as you need. I didn't say much, but I didn't hang up either. That was something. Howard's legal situation resolved itself over the following months in ways that are, honestly, still complicated. His attorney argued that no one had been harmed by the misidentification, that the man buried in his grave had died of natural causes, with no family to mourn him. That argument did not go as well as his attorney hoped. The financial fraud was harder to dismiss. He eventually reached a plea agreement. I was not required to testify, though I had told my attorney I was prepared to. I was asked once by a friend from Grief Group who found out what had happened, how I felt about him, whether I hated him. It's the question people always want to ask, I think, because hate is a clean feeling, and clean feelings are satisfying. I told her the truth, which is that I don't know what I feel about him exactly. I feel something. It shifts. There are mornings I wake up and I feel a fury so complete it has no edges. There are afternoons when I remember 38 years, the Sedona cabin, the way he made coffee, the night my daughter was born, and he cried in the hospital hallway where he thought I couldn't see him, and the fury goes somewhere quieter and sadder and harder to name. Grief, maybe, or the grief underneath the grief. But underneath all of it is something steadier, something that surprised me. I am still here. I did not fall apart. I was in the Costco, and I saw my dead husband standing in the frozen food aisle. and my cart rolled into the refrigerator case, and I steadied myself, and I said his name, and I stood my ground. And then I went home and I sat at my kitchen table and I made a decision and I called the sheriff's office and I hired an attorney and I answered my daughter's call when I was ready and I am still here. That matters to me more than I expected it to. My daughter and I are in a different place now than we were. I won't pretend otherwise. There is damage there that didn't exist before, and I think about it sometimes. The version of our relationship we had before that Tuesday in March, before I found out she had been carrying his secret for 6 months. I miss that version. I grieve it actually in the same complicated way I grieved the 38 years. But she is my daughter. She made a terrible choice under pressure from a man who had spent decades being very good at convincing people that his decisions were actually kindness. I know how persuasive he could be. I lived with that persuasion for 38 years. I don't excuse what she did. I also understand it in a way that makes excusing it feel less necessary. We have dinner together most Sundays now when she comes down. We talk. There are still things we don't talk about, and I imagine there will be for a while. But we're building something. Rebuilding, maybe. It's slower and more careful than what we had before. I find I don't entirely mind slow and careful. At 64, I've developed a certain appreciation for things that are built with attention. The house is mine. I refinanced after everything settled legally, which involved more paperwork than I care to describe, and it is entirely mine now. I had a woman come in and rearrange the living room furniture, something I'd wanted to do for years. Howard didn't like change. I moved the couch to face the back window instead of the television. I sit there in the evening sometimes and watch the light change on the desert. It's the same light it always was, the same amber and gold. It's mine now in a different way. I still go to grief group on Thursday nights. My loss looks different from most of the losses in that room, but loss is still loss, and those people understand something about the particular work of continuing to live, which I find I still need. I painted a watercolor of the view from my back window last month. It's not very good. I framed it anyway and hung it in the hallway where I can see it when I walk past. My dead husband is alive. He has consequences now that he will live with for a long time. And I have a life, my life, actually mine, that I'm still figuring out what to do with. I think I'll figure it out. I'm not in a hurry. After everything, I've learned that I'm better at continuing than I thought I was. That's not a small thing to know about yourself. It's actually, I've found, quite enough. I used to think that the hardest thing a person could do was survive grief. I know better now. The hardest thing is finding out the grief was built on a lie and surviving that too. When I stood in that Costco aisle and said Howard's name, something in me was already making a choice, even if I didn't know it yet. I didn't collapse. I didn't look away. I held on to the cold of that refrigerator case, and I stayed upright, and I asked him the question that mattered. Who is buried in your grave? That steadiness didn't come from nowhere. It came from 14 months of doing the quiet, unglamorous work of continuing. Grief group on Thursday nights, terrible watercolors, meals eaten alone at a table set for one. None of that felt like strength at the time. It felt like just getting through, but it was building something in me that I didn't know I'd need. Howard made his choices the way people often do when they lack the courage to face what they've done, by deciding that disappearing was kinder than honesty. He told himself a story about protection. He told our daughter the same story, and she believed it long enough to make a choice she'll spend years reckoning with. That's how it works, I think. Dishonesty doesn't just damage the person it's aimed at. It moves through everyone it touches and leaves each of them holding something they didn't ask to carry. My daughter carried his secret for 6 months. She thought she was shielding me. What she was actually doing was choosing his comfort over my right to know my own life. I understand the pressure she was under. I understand how persuasive he could be. Understanding it didn't make it hurt less. But I've learned that understanding and excusing are two different things, and only one of them is worth anything in the long run. What I keep coming back to, what I think matters most in all of this, is that the truth has a weight to it, not metaphorically, literally. You can feel it when someone is finally telling you the truth after a long time of not being told it. Something settles. Even when the truth is devastating, even when it rearranges everything you thought you knew, there is something in the body that recognizes it and relaxes. I felt it standing in that aisle. I felt it again when my daughter finally stopped explaining and just said she was sorry. Howard's choices caught up with him the way choices do, not through some cosmic punishment, but through the simple mechanical fact that reality doesn't renegotiate. You can change your name. You can move 6 hours away. You can build a new life on top of the old one, like a second floor on a crumbling foundation. Eventually, the foundation matters. I am 64 years old and I live alone in a house with rearranged furniture and a watercolor in the hallway that isn't very good. I have a daughter I'm still rebuilding something with. I have a grief group that knows more about me than most people do. I have a life that is entirely, unambiguously mine. I followed my dead husband out of that Costco and into the rest of my life. I didn't know that's what I was doing at the time, but that's what it was. I'm still here. That turns out to be enough.